Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Welcome back. And we now sit down with award-winning South African author and sociologist Shafinaaz Hassem to explore how her powerful storytelling and sociological insights have helped shape conversations on women's autonomy, gender-based violence, and social change. This is all about championing women's voices in literature and life. My guest is the amazing Shafinaaz Hassem. And of course, I'm a huge fan of hers, and it gives me such pleasure to be chatting with her this morning and honoring her as a woman change maker. Assalamu alaikum to you, dear Shafinaaz. Welcome to the program. What an honor to have you talking with me this morning.
Walaikum salam, Auntie Julie. You've always been championing my work from the very beginning when no one had heard from me. So it's an absolute pleasure to be back on the show with you. I have to say a Facebook memory came up. I think we did an interview about 10 years ago. It just happened to come up. So this is auspicious.
Okay, alhamdulillah for that. May we have many more such interviews and interactions, inshallah. So for those people who don't know you, Shafinaaz, tell us a bit about yourself, your journey through literature. And of course, I do know the other part of you is all about sociology. You studied sociology. But I'd like to leave that for another interview. Let's focus on your books and literature.
So, alhamdulillah, as a trained sociologist, I think my impetus for writing started from that point because I was researching Muslim women in South Africa. And my first book, Daughters Are Diamonds, was based on looking at a more egalitarian reading of the Quran and the rights and responsibilities of women in particular because of how the media portrayed that. So Daughters Are Diamonds was based on my research. But then subsequently, I wrote GBV, I wrote human trafficking. My fiction writing came out from there because I believed there was an opportunity to create dialogue or to add to the ongoing dialogue through the form of literature, using fiction as a vehicle for those conversations. And alhamdulillah, it's been an ongoing kind of passion that's developed, and I've made a life of it.
Subhanallah for that, and may you continue doing that and touching other lives through your work. Daughters Are Diamonds touched me in a very big way. And I kind of wondered at the time, I mean, you were way younger then, and how can this young lady be tackling such huge issues? And it resonated with me, and I guess cause of women around the world. What was it that drove you to write this book?
I remember, when I was conducting the research for the book, it was based on my master's thesis at the time, and my supervisor, Professor Bozzoli, was excited about the prospect of interrogating women's identity, but through the lens of a Muslim woman, speaking and writing about Muslim women in South Africa. And this was more than 20 years ago, the early 2000s. So the research was conducted in a way where when I sat before the panel, the big question I was asked was, what's the relevance of this research to the broader academic community? And that's the kind of critique we would get as young Muslim researchers. Obviously, the floor is open in so many ways now, 20 years later, 25 years later. So I think that it was important, firstly, to document. And I recognized that early on, even if I might have being younger, and when you're younger, you sort of have maybe a greater ability to take risks, which is also a great thing. And you understand that this gap needs to be filled. There's a gap and somebody needs to start filling it. There was literature available from other parts of the world, but the South African perspective, there was still a thirst and a paucity in the literature. So that was my starting point with a great supervisor who saw the interest and the importance of carrying on with this research, even if the rest of the academic panel was a little more skeptical. And as you know, alhamdulillah, Auntie Julie, 2003, the research came out, but 2007, Daughters Are Diamonds was published as the first book that I put out. And it just sort of exploded in the literary and academic spaces. And it grew me. It really grew me to a sense where I knew that I was doing something that was beyond, it stopped belonging to me. It belonged to whoever was partaking in the research, in the reading, and in the communication and the conversations that were built around it. I really felt at a point, and this is with most of my writing, that the work dragged me along. It wasn't me writing the books or me putting them out there. I was just part of the process. I just consider myself an instrument in this project to create a legacy and communication around social issues that we face as Muslim women in South Africa and as a broader community.
And undoubtedly it had sparked some sort of an awakening in women in South Africa. And from, 20 years ago, we can see the difference in the thinking and the behavior of Muslim women in our country.
Absolutely. And I think that there's also, the conversations would happen in women's spaces. And some of the contradictions would happen there as well. So when we talk about patriarchal readings of the Quran, for example, and we talk about culture imposing certain expectations on how women behave and conduct ourselves, it's not men telling us what to do. It's women who transfer some of that cultural narrative down, and it's sometimes read as almost a religious obligation. Once we read purely and clearly from the Quran and understand our rights as Muslim women, the perspective changes. You understand that Islam is egalitarian in its approach and that there are those rights. And I think that that conversation has changed because we have diluted and moved away from the more cultural readings, whether from the Indian, the Afrikaans, the Portuguese, the Arab cultures, and come back to a pure reading of Quran. And I think that's what's changed the narrative. It's changed our view, and it's changed the way in which we operationalize ourselves in future generations. So there's a lot more power in the space, and we find our own solutions to our own problems as well. And I think that's important.
Subhanallah. So very liberating is all I can say to that. Now, your novel, Sophia, addressed gender-based violence, which is, we know, endemic, not only here, but globally. And of course, this was used in academic settings. How important is it for literature to be part of education on women's issues? And are you seeing that shift since you've actually penned that book?
I was, a little tentative when Sophia first came out in 2012 because people were saying, well, how do you write about these issues? Doesn't it just make us look like we just have all these problems? And we may not have been necessarily ready for writing and talking about gender-based violence in South Africa 12 and 13 years ago. But once books like this started to be written, started to be spoken about, definitely, I think the conversation changed. And I found great reception because we wanted to talk about it. I remember speaking on one of the sort of secular medias, and the interviewer said, well, you don't even have a problem of alcoholism here. Not to say that we don't in our community, but in this specific instance, I didn't want to use a crutch to excuse gender-based violence. I wanted to just look at the processing of trauma and how that comes through the generations. And Sophia did that, and Sophia continues to be spoken about, read. In fact, this Women's Month, there's a book club in Polokwane that's reading it again. I think that the importance of the material speaks for itself because it also builds bridges. It may have been written about a Muslim family. It may have created a conversation around gender-based violence, but it has built bridges of empathy to say, well, we all have these problems, even if our perspectives and our community or clan kind of understanding of family might differ a little bit here and there. There's those commonalities, and the solutions can be found by reading and talking about things in a very palatable way, which is through fiction, because fiction just presents the story to you. It doesn't point fingers and say, you are wrong and you are wrong and you are wrong, So I think that there's also a kind of forgiveness through literature. And solutions are much easily found that way, and not only through literature, through the media. And Julie, you've been a veteran in the media for many years, and your conversations have created such a huge shift. So I think through our writing, through our speaking, through the way in which we present our media in different forms, we open the opportunity for women to speak their solutions themselves, and for us to get together in these circles and create these opportunities for change.
Despite all of that, despite these amazing pieces of work by yourself and other writers within our community, we still seem to be pushing back, or the male members or families who are experiencing all of these social upheavals in their lives either pretend it's not happening, sweep it under the carpets, don't talk about it, and don't go out to seek the necessary support and help, because only with help and support can you fix yourself as a broken family. It's still not happening enough. And I'm kind of wondering, are you going to tackle these issues in one of your future books?
So I've written about various, sort of social issues through short story and through fiction, and we continue to speak about it. But I'm also enlightened by the fact that there are so many counselors, coaches, people taking on different forms of interventions in order to deal with substance abuse, domestic violence, child abuse, alcohol abuse, the various issues that we face as a society. So I'm hopeful, but I also know that, it's not sort of like a one-size-fits-all kind of tailor-made a solution for everything. We can tailor-make them through identifying different aspects of community. And I think that there are more people getting involved in wanting to create change. And yes, we do have various concerns, but I think through writing and conversation and intervention, by sitting down with the community, we are able to break through those barriers. Another thing I want to touch on is that, we write, when you consider yourself an Islamic feminist, to also understand that aside from the equality that's and the kind of collaborative approach that the Quran has between genders, we must also understand that men are also often victims of abuse. And when we start to understand that, then we see a very different kind of potential and approach to solving these problems. And I
Okay,
think that,
Shafinaaz, I'm sorry to interrupt you there. Let's go for a break. We'll pick up when we come back. Welcome back. Shafinaaz Hassem, author and sociologist, is my guest. We're talking about, obviously, championing women's voices in literature and life. Just before the ad break, Shafinaaz, you spoke about men being victims of violence, gender-based violence as well. Are we as a society talking about it? Because violence or gender-based violence does present in different forms. It could be emotional, it could be financial, and so many other different ways. Should we be talking more about gender-based violence against men and boys?
Absolutely, Auntie Julie. And I think we're seeing a shift to the conversation, because in the past there was great stigma in male victims of abuse coming out. And you still see people making these kind of sideline jokes, or men thinking, I'm supposed to handle the stuff, whatever life throws at me, and so they don't speak up about it. These kind of side jokes and side comments that we hear. As much as we see femicide still happening in South Africa, there are, male victims. There's a higher increase in suicide rates among victims not being able to deal with this. So it's important to open that conversation up and to deal with it in our communities as well, so that the stigma is released, and so that we build for a stronger future generation as well. We don't feel ashamed to speak about the kind of challenges that are faced by men in our society.
And I think that it's really time that the men have these type of discussions when they get together at mosques, when they go for salah. And they need to start focusing on all of these societal ills that we're dealing with currently. But let's move on then regarding you, Shafinaaz Hassem, as the writer. You were recognized by UNESCO, many congratulations, as one of Africa's top writers under 40. This is a huge achievement. How has that influenced your role in empowering women through your writing?
Alhamdulillah, it's valuable to be seen and recognized for the work, but it also gives one the understanding that there's a greater responsibility in what's written, the content that I put out there, and the kind of conversations that are necessary, both to create legacy and to create these shifts that we need in healing our communities, in enhancing our communities, and also in encouraging community members, young and old, which is a real big sort of project for me, is encouraging people to write their own stories. And by this, I mean writing community stories, writing biographies, autobiographies, memoirs. I'm so sort of passionate about that. So I think that the great thing is, I mean, this UNESCO award was awarded in 2014. I was under 40 to a long time ago, alhamdulillah. But I think that it did kind of give me the impetus to continue doing what I was doing, and to understand that sometimes in this limited life, in this limited amount of time, there's just only so much of time we have, and what really is my purpose with the writing, and where do I go from here? And with that, I started writing the Nisa Kamar series for young adults, which for me was tapping into my past, looking at the innocence of childhood, but also looking at the importance of telling our stories, documenting our stories, even if it was through fiction. And I think the power of that shows in readership engaging with the stories, with the books, owning the stories and saying, this is our story. So I think that we shift the narrative and the understanding of our importance in fiction when we realize we don't have to read a book that comes from London or New York or whatever the case might be. It can come from Johannesburg and Durban. And having said that, I think it was also important for me, and continues to be, that when you're writing about gender-based violence or like human trafficking in my Economics of Love and Happiness, those are social issues. Those are important issues. But for example, when I wrote Darlings of Durban last year, this was a story that celebrated sisterhood. And it talked about four women from different backgrounds and looked at various issues. But even the intimate narrative can be political. Talking about our ordinary everyday lives is just as powerful and political as writing about GBV and writing about human trafficking, because inevitably, when stories are written, there's something of a social commentary that comes through.
Let's talk about being a curator of for the time of the Writer Festival. Being the curator, of course, the themes or conversations, are they your own ideas, or is it a collaborative effort? And how do you come up with all of that?
So I was appointed in November last year, and the Time of the Writer is hosted by the Center for Creative Arts at UKZN. And what had happened was I relied on, I've been presenting a book review show over the last 5 years. So I had relied on the networks that I had to bring together conversations for this conference, which takes place in March every year. We're already working towards the next one, inshallah. So what happens is, I mean, I had great creative freedom in presenting the panels and in putting them together. I pretty much put a wish list together, and the team made it happen, so to speak. So the collaboration happens in the logistics and carrying out the invitations, bringing down the authors, getting the venues ready, having the media there, getting crowd developed for these sessions. It's an incredible energy when you're in a space that celebrates literature and other forms of arts, as the Center for Creative Arts does. The festival was in its 28th year, so it's one of the oldest festivals in the country, and has great support from the industry because of not just its history, but its focus and commitment to celebrating and enhancing literature in South Africa. So they have an outreach program as well that takes place during the week. And my colleagues were then working on taking authors into the communities, to high schools, to primary schools, and to some of the universities, just so that they could engage a larger audience and sometimes just take the presentations to children and to learners instead of getting everyone, to come to the main venue in central town. So I think that it's wonderful and collaborative in that sense. And I had great joy in bringing my network to the sessions and being able to create conversations around politics, fiction, even romance, children's literature. And I think that we have much to look forward to for the new year as well, inshallah. I hope that Time of the Writer can be a destination festival where everyone that loves books can join us
Inshallah.
during the festival week, inshallah.
I worry about AI and where technology is taking us. I think you and I have had this conversation before. We've seen tabloids and broadsheets almost disappear. They no longer feature in our lives, or most of our lives anyway. We're so dependent on our devices to consume news, etc. Where do you see the world of literature and books featuring? Do you have any concerns that because of technology that might also start dying a slow death?
I remain hopeful, and Julia, I'll tell you why. I think that books are a medium that have survived thousands of years, and I believe that the touch and feel of the book, that tactile sense, won't be lost. But I'd like to think that we've broadened our forms of expression through the media, through technological advancements, through audiobooks, because you can be driving to work or taking a run in the morning and you can still be consuming literature. And sometimes what I found is with ebooks, people still want to go back and then actually buy the physical book because they enjoyed the content so much, or they want to have a reread of it. So I remain hopeful in kind of the collaborative approach. I don't think that books in their physical form will die. I just think that you might have some people who prefer to consume material in a different way, in a different form of expression, in shorter clips or short videos or YouTube shorts or whatever it is, and some who might still have that sense that we're reading on a broader scale. What I do critique is the cost of books, especially in South Africa, and I hope that we can get more in organizations, including government, to subsidize, to de-tax books and to make it more accessible, because I hear people saying that we don't have readers, but we do. It's just that books are terribly expensive, and even a reader like myself has to think twice before I splash out on 3 or 4 books for the month, and I usually consume much more than that. So I think that those are the kinds of conversations we have about how do we get books into the hands of readers, especially children. How do we inculcate a reading culture? And I think it starts from the lap, where you hold your child in your lap and you page through the book, and they start to associate reading with a loving gesture, with quality time, and with a bonding. So I think that it's just the kind of work that can be done to inculcate a reading culture that will remain with us, and obviously making books accessible on the logistical side, which is about bringing the cost down.
And that's all we have time for. Shafinaaz, your powerful message to all of the powerful women watching us this morning, short and sharp, please, what would it be?
I believe that every one of us has a story inside of us. Whether you're writing that story or living that story, just remember how you want to be remembered when you're creating that passion and that purpose and following through with it, inshallah. So that's my story. Live your story.
Thank you indeed. What a pleasure to have had you on the show today. Till the next time, as always, go well. Allah watch over you. From me, Julie Ali, thank you for watching. Assalamu alaikum and Khuda Hafiz.